What is consent? In light of a number of expert opinions being expressed in mainstream media about how vaccine mandates are in no way coercive, I thought it was a good time on Don't Talk TV to take a closer look at what is assault, and more importantly, what is consent and what is not consent. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So as I mentioned in the preamble, there's been a number of opinions expressed on mainstream media by lawyers and law professors who are saying that employers forcing employees at risk of their job to get a vaccination is not a mandatory vaccine, and that's not coercive in any way. So I want to take a look at those opinions, and then, as I said in the preamble, discuss what is an assault, and more importantly, what is consent, and we'll look some more at the case of Her Majesty the Queen and Ewanchuk. It's one of the leading cases on consent. It's a case that involved not an employer, but a potential employer, and how that position of authority impacted on the consent or lack of consent in that case. So first I want to look at CTV News' quote, truth tracker, unquote. So on September the 1st, their truth tracker ran an article entitled, Do Vaccine Mandates Violate Canadians' Charter Rights? So just to skip here, they're talking about everyone's Section 7 right to the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So in their analysis, their fact checker here is apparently Cheryl Milne, director of the David Asper Center for Constitutional Rights at the University of Toronto. So in her view, Section 7 doesn't even apply. And she says Section 15 may apply, but here's the key section here where she says vaccine mandates are not forced vaccination. So she says that there's some people who think that vaccine passports and the use of the word mandate means that we're holding people down and forcing them to be vaccinated, Milne told CTVnews.ca by phone this week. It's just limiting the ability to participate in certain activities if they don't have a vaccine. If, in fact, the government were forcing people to be vaccinated, like actually physically holding people down and giving them a vaccine, that would probably be a pretty clear charter breach. Well, probably a pretty clear charter breach. Well, I mean, the fact that she says that would only probably be a breach, I think shows pretty clearly the bias here. Now, maybe some would say I have a bias in favor of the charter, so be it. I'm proud to wear that accusation that I'm biased in favor of personal autonomy, freedom, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, and then she says here, these may be inconvenient and unwanted options, but they are options. And she talks about employees seeking accommodation or taking a leave. Well, first of all, many employers are not offering any accommodation. They're saying, you get the jab or you're fired. This isn't a temporary thing. I mean, the vaccine mandates that I've seen, and I've had many people approach me and show me what their employers are sending, doesn't say anything about this only applies for the next 6 months. It's just a blanket. You need a COVID-19 vaccine or you're fired. Now, I, in the strongest terms possible, completely disagree with Ms. Milne's interpretation. We're not talking about mere inconvenience here. We're talking about people losing their ability to earn an income, their ability to pay for their home, and their ability to put food on the table. That's not a difficult choice. That's a choice between life and death. Now, she might say, well, there's other jobs out there. And true enough, there are other jobs out there, but for example, nurses coming to me, they lose their job. They can't be nurses anymore. They're going to have to learn a whole new job, and they're going to have a hard time putting food on the table, especially when they can't go to school to upgrade their education to find a new job. So I totally disagree with her characterization. To say that this is merely inconvenience or unwanted totally downplays this, and only someone whose job is entirely secure and has no fear whatsoever of losing their job, and has never had fear in their whole life of losing their job, could say something like that, in my respectful view. But let's have a look at the law. So as I mentioned at the outset, I was going to have another look at Her Majesty the Queen and Ewanchuk. That's a 1999 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. In episode 50, I went over this in the context of a vaccine passport. Everything I said applies, absolutely applies when we're speaking about mandatory vaccination. Take this vaccination or lose your job. So let's review what the Supreme Court of Canada said about assault and consent. So I'm looking at paragraph 28 of this decision, and again, anyone who wants to have a look at this case for themselves, I'll put the Canley link in the show description. Paragraph 28 is very important, and it describes the rationale underlying the criminalization of assault. So what is assault and why is it illegal? This is key in my view. Quote, "The rationale underlying the criminalization of assault explains this. Society is committed to protecting the personal integrity, both physical and psychological, of every individual. Having control over who touches one's body and how lies at the core of human dignity and autonomy." Let me say that again, because this is something that I don't think people like Ms. Milne understand, or the people who are forcing these mandates understand. Having control over who touches one's body and how lies at the core of human dignity and autonomy. The inclusion of assault and sexual assault in the code expresses society's determination to protect the security of the person from any non-consensual contact or threats of force. The common law has recognized for centuries that the individual's right to physical integrity is a fundamental principle, every man's person being sacred and no other having a right to meddle with it in any the slightest manner." End of quote. This couldn't be clearer. The control over who touches one's body and how they touch your body lies at the core of human dignity and autonomy. So taking away that choice attacks human dignity and autonomy. And in a vaccine mandate, that is taking away that choice over who touches one's body and how, unless you're willing to lose your job. That's where the effect of coercion comes in. Paragraph 36 now. The Supreme Court says here, to be legally effective, consent must be freely given. Therefore, even if the complainant consented or her conduct raises a reasonable doubt about her non-consent, circumstances may arise which call into question what factors prompted her apparent consent. So this applies directly to vaccine mandates. Employer would say, well, they went and got it. We didn't hold them down. I mean, that's exactly what that professor is talking about, saying, well, the government's not holding people down, so it doesn't violate Section 7. But that's not what the criminal code, and that's not what the Supreme Court says. The Supreme Court says that even apparently going along with it isn't enough when that consent is vitiated. Let's continue. The code defines a series of conditions under which the law will deem an absence of consent in cases of assault. So we're not talking just sexual assault, any assault, which is any unwanted, any touching of your body with any application of force without your consent, notwithstanding the complainant's ostensible consent or participation. So again, participating in getting your vaccination, that might be ostensible consent, but as enumerated in section 265 sub 3, these include submission by reason of force, fear, threats, fraud, or the exercise of authority, and codifying the long-standing common rule that consent given under fear or duress is ineffective. Again, let me say that again. Consent given under fear or duress is ineffective. People are clearly fearful when they're told, you do this or you're losing their job. As I said, people are going to lose their houses, or they could potentially lose the ability to put food on the table. That causes fear. That causes legitimate fear. And if people are getting a vaccine only to keep their job, they're acting under fear or duress. Another quote from the Quebec Court of Appeal, Justice Fish. Consent is stripped of its defining characteristic when it is applied to the submission, non-resistance, non-objection, or even the apparent agreement of a deceived, unconscious, or compelled will. And this is what people like Ms. Milne are missing. They're missing out on the compulsion from being forced to take this or you're going to lose your job. And the court's concern is whether the person freely made up their mind to the conduct in question. Another Supreme Court case quickly, Her Majesty the Queen and MLM, indexed as Her Majesty the Queen and MML. Again, I'll post the link to Canley in the show description. Very short case, basically one paragraph, judgment from Justice Sapinka. Here's the key part. The majority of the Court of Appeal was in error in holding that a victim is required to offer some minimal word or gesture of objection, and that lack of resistance must be equated with consent. So that was an error. So the Supreme Court has said the victim of an assault does not need to object, does not need to fight back. Let's go back to Ewanchuk for a minute, and let's just look at the facts of that case and how that was applied. Now, just a warning to viewers, this is a sexual assault case, so there may be some disturbing material here. So the complainant was a 17-year-old woman living in Edmonton. She met the accused through a roommate, and basically this guy operated a business. So The accused asked the complainant if she was interested in a job. She indicated that she was, and they met a short time later, again in the Heritage Mall parking lot. At the accused's suggestion, the interview took place in his van. In the words of the complainant, a very businesslike, polite conversation took place. Sometime later, the complainant asked if she could smoke a cigarette, and the accused suggested they could move outside. Once outside, he asked her if she'd like to see some of his work, which he kept inside the trailer attached to his van, and she said she would. So paragraph 4 here, they entered the trailer. She purposely left the door open. He followed her in, closed the door, and locked it. Once inside the trailer, the complainant and the accused sat down side by side on the floor of the trailer. They spoke and looked through a portfolio of his work. This lasted 10 to 15 minutes. Then the conversation moved to personal matters. So there was some massaging going on. She massaged him. He massaged her. While he's massaging her, he brought his hands down around her stomach, up under her breasts, and started getting quite close to her. She said no. So he backed off, said, "See, I'm a nice guy. It's okay." Then he asked her to turn and face him. He began massaging her feet. Again, this progressed up. He's touching her inner thigh and pelvic area. He never used or threatened any force. The complainant testified, though, that she didn't want to egg him on. This continued for a little while. Ultimately, she got out of the van. And, ultimately, Ewanchuk was convicted of sexual assault. Because even though she actually said no at a number of points, but there was also this veneer of a potential employer and an interview. So she didn't even work for him yet. She was just interviewing for a job, and that fear that she might not get the job held her back from resisting more vigorously. So this would apply even more where someone's already employed and they're being told, take this vaccination or lose your job. Let's just go back to the sexual assault context. Would anyone anywhere suggest that it's not sexual assault if an employer said, have sex with me or I'm going to fire you? No one would say that, but it's the exact same principle. It's not a sexual assault, but it's absolutely an assault to unwillingly and without consent be vaccinated. This has nothing to do with whether the vaccines are safe or whether we know whether the long-term effects of them are or whether an individual has religious objections. This is purely the application of force, coercion, fear, and how that makes a medical procedure non-consensual and assault. So this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, contact a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My 1-855 numbers and website are listed below. If there's any shows, topics that you'd like to see me cover, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. I'll do my best to address and do an episode on the show you've requested. And if you found this episode at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, following me on social media, and be sure to subscribe to me on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube in the event that I'm deplatformed on any of them.